I had a 7th Armored patch, and I was curious what medical department was attached to it, and I found lots of info. Nevertheless, let's jump in. The 77th Armored Medical Battalion entered the summer of 1944, preparing for its first combat operations in Europe. While many combat units focused on weapons, tactics, and vehicle maintenance, the Medical Battalion spent its final weeks in England preparing to support the rapidly moving forces of the 7th Armored Division. Mechanics worked extensively on battalion vehicles, installing additional racks for gasoline cans and baggage to increase operational range. Medical supplies and inventoried and repacked. Vehicles were inspected and personnel prepared for overseas movement. The battalion understood that once it landed in France, it would need to keep pace with armored formations capable of advancing dozens of miles in a single day. Throughout early August, officers finalized movement plans while enlisted personnel packed equipment and preparations for embarking. On August 7th, 1944, the battalion left Tidworth Barracks and entered the staging areas for invasion on the continent. 2 days later, elements of the battalion crossed the English Channel aboard various vessels, including Liberty ships and landing craft tanks. On August 11th, the battalion landed on Omaha Beach and officially entered the European theater of operations. Following the Normandy landings, the battalion immediately began supporting the rapidly advancing 7th Armored Division. The original medical plan called for each company of the battalion to support one of the division's combat commands. Able Company generally supported Combat Command A, B Company supported Combat Command B, and C Company supported Combat Command Reserve. The ambulance collecting points were established near Combat Command headquarters, while collecting stations were positioned further to the rear. In theory, wounded soldiers would move through these stations before being transferred to larger hospitals. However, the rapid pace of Allied advance soon created serious challenges. As the division raced across France, medical facilities often found themselves dozens of miles behind advancing combat units. Ambulances were forced to travel increasingly long distances over crowded roads, delaying treatment and evacuation. The battalion quickly realized that traditional medical doctrine could not keep pace with armored warfare. As a result, officers began adapting procedures to maintain effective casualty care. The battalion's movements across France reflected the speed of Allied breakout following Normandy. Throughout August 1944, medical personnel found themselves in a constant cycle of movement, setup, treatment, and relocation. The unit passed through towns such as La Ferrante-Bernard, Corville, Trinon, Chaufour, Suze, Millen, Chenozy, and Flemings. I butchered all of those. In rapid succession. In many cases, personnel arrived at location, established treatment facilities, cared for casualties, and then received orders to move again within a matter of hours. Medical officers frequently had little time to establish permanent facilities and instead operated from temporary sites whenever space was available. This relentless pace placed enormous strain on personnel and equipment. Ambulance crews drove long hours, mechanics worked continuously to keep vehicles operational, and medical staff treated casualties while preparing for the next movement. Although the battalion's primary mission was to save lives, its personnel were often exposed to the enemy. This became apparent when Technician 5th Grade Lucas of A Company became the battalion's first battle casualty. While unloading wounded soldiers from an ambulance while under any fire, he was struck in the back by shrapnel. Ambulance drivers, litter bearers, and aid station personnel routinely operated within the range of enemy artillery and small arms fire while carrying out their duties. As the 7th Armored Division moved into Lorraine region, being Verdun and Belcourt, during September of 1944, casualty numbers increased significantly. The battalion found itself processing hundreds of wounded soldiers while simultaneously maintaining support for fast-moving combat commands. The battalion's second casualty occurred on the 7th of September, when Private Chapman of C Company, who was on special duty with the 38th Medical Detachment as a litter bearer, was wounded when he was shot in the left arm. During several periods of intense fighting, A and B companies handled more than 300 casualties with only a few days. Medical personnel worked around the clock despite these demands. The battalion continued moving forward with the division, whether the combat activity temporarily decreased. Personnel focused on replenishing medical supplies, repairing damaged equipment, and preparing for the next offensive. The 7th Armored Division was transferred to the U.S. 9th Army on September 25, 1944, and immediately moved north into the Netherlands to support Operation Market Garden. The division's mission was to secure the eastern flank of the Allied corridor, while British and Canadian forces worked to open the Scheldisch, I don't know how to pronounce that, and the vital port of Antwerp. For the 77th Armored Medical Battalion, this meant adapting to an entirely new operational environment. The medical personnel who had spent weeks racing across France now found themselves supporting operations in a densely populated region. On the 26th of September, the battalion had entered Belgium, where they were primarily traveling to the Netherlands. When on the 30th of September, they arrived, where the weather became one of its greatest challenges. On September 30th, 1944, the 7th Armored Division launched an attack against the heavily defended Dutch town of Overloon. What commanders hoped would be a rapid advance instead turned into one of the most difficult engagements fought by the division. Thick woods, muddy ground, artillery fire, and determined German resistance transformed the battle into a slow and costly struggle. Fighting became so intensive that many veterans later compared conditions to the First World War combat. The 77th Armored Medical Battalion experienced a dramatic increase in casualties during this period. As wounded soldiers streamed back from the front lines, medical personnel worked continuously to triage casualties, administer emergency treatment, and coordinate evacuation. The battle lasted until October 8th, when the division was relieved by the British 11th Armored Division. During November, heavy rains transformed roads and bivouac areas into seas of mud, making vehicle movement increasingly difficult. Quote, on the 9th of November, A Company moved to the battalion area of Insline, Holland. I probably butchered that. We had several days of rain and our bivouac area was a sea of mud. After encountering extreme difficulties with moving of vehicles in and out of the area, it was decided to move all the companies to billets and suitable footings for vehicles close to the homes or buildings occupied by the troops. Eventually, the C Company moved to Brno, Belgium, where they used part of a castle dating to 1665 that briefly served as a recuperations facility. They also occupied a room of a schoolhouse and several private billets. One of the most significant accomplishments of the 77th Armored Medical Battalion was its treatment of combat exhaustion cases. As the campaign continued across France and into Belgium and Holland, commanders increasingly recognized that psychological strain had become a major factor affecting combat effectiveness. Soldiers who had endured weeks or months of continuous combat often suffered from what then was known as combat exhaustion, a condition caused by prolonged exposure to stress, fatigue, artillery bombardment, and frontline combat. The importance of this mission was seen in the promotion of Captain Vogel, the division's neuropsychiatric and NP surgeon and head of the combat exhaustion platoon, who was promoted to major on September 18, 1944. These facilities provided rest, food, medical supervision, clean bedding, and temporary break from combat conditions. The goal was to restore soldiers as quickly as possible and return them to their units before they became long-term casualties. The tactical situation changed dramatically on October 27, 1944, when German forces launched a major counterattack centered on the Dutch town of Mechelen. The offensive struck elements of the 87th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron and threatened Allied positions throughout the sector. For several days, the 7th Armored Division participated in heavy fighting as American and British forces worked to contain and eventually defeat the attack. The medical battalion once again found itself dealing with increased casualty numbers while operating under difficult battlefield conditions. The fighting also coincided with significant leadership changes within the division. During the night of October 31st and November 1st, Major General Lindsay Sylvester was relieved and Major General Robert W. Hertzbrook assumed command of the division. The German Ardennes offensive, better known as the Battle of the Bulge, placed unprecedented demands upon the 77th Armored Medical Battalion. As German forces launched their surprise attack in December of 1944, the 7th Armored Division was rushed into action to help blunt the offensive. The medical battalion suddenly found itself supporting combat operations under some of the harshest conditions encountered by the entire war. Bitter cold, snow-covered roads, poor visibility, and continuous combat created severe difficulties for casualty evacuation. Ambulances were often on icy roads, while medical personnel worked long hours and freezing temperatures. The number of wounded increased dramatically as the division fought despite defensive battles against determined German attacks. Medical officers had to continuously adapt evacuation routes and treatment procedures as tactical situation changed. Following the conclusion of the Ardennes fighting, the battalion entered a period of recovery and reorganization. Months of continuous operations had taken a toll on both personnel and equipment. Vehicles required maintenance, medical supplies, and had to be replenished, and exhausted personnel needed rest. During February 1945, the division temporarily occupied reserve positions, allowing the medical battalion to conduct additional training and rehabilitation programs. One particularly interesting initiative involved rotating medical personnel from infantry, tank, engineer, and reconnaissance units through the medical facilities. This allowed frontline medics to gain additional experience while providing temporary relief from combat conditions. In March of 1945, the 77th Armored Medical Battalion crossed into Germany alongside the advancing elements of the 7th Armored Division. For many soldiers, this represented a symbolic milestone. After landing in Normandy and advancing across France, Belgium, and Luxembourg and the Netherlands, they had finally reached the territory of the Third Reich itself. Medical units continued the familiar routine of establishing collecting stations, clearing stations, and evacuation routes as combat commands pushed deeper into Germany. The after-action report notes that headquarters established a command post within a former German observation pillbox, a reminder of how quickly Allied forces were overrunning enemy defensive positions. As Allied forces encircled and destroyed German forces trapped within the Ruhr pocket, the 77th Armored Medical Battalion continued supporting combat operations across the broad front. Casualties resulted not only from direct combat, but from accidents, illness, and general hazards associated with military operations. Medical officers constantly coordinated with division headquarters to ensure wounded personnel could move efficiently through the evacuation chain. A remarkable degree of planning and coordination behind the scenes before combat operation began. Medical officers often traveled proposed routes to identify hospitals, road conditions, and potential treatment sites. By early May 1945, the battalion had reached the Elbe River. Elements of A Company became among the first battalion personnel to cross the river, with the remainder of the unit following shortly thereafter. Columns of prisoners stretched for miles, creating one of the most memorable sights witnessed by battalion personnel during the war. For soldiers who had spent months advancing across Europe, the sheer scale of German surrender confirmed that the conflict was rapidly drawing to a close. Although combat operations were ending, medical responsibilities remained extensive. One of the most unusual assignments received by the battalion occurred on May 6, 1945. The unit was ordered to assume the supervision of 2 German prisoner-of-war hospitals. This assignment involved overseeing facilities that remained staffed by largely German doctors, nurses, and orderlies. American personnel did not replace the German staff, but instead supervised operations, enforced standards, and ensured proper care of patients. When Victory in Europe Day arrived on May 8, 1945, the battalion marked the occasion with a relatively subdued manner, rather than recording massive celebrations. The medical mission continued almost immediately. With combat concluded, attention shifted toward occupation duties and public health concerns. Medical personnel worked to improve sanitation, inspect facilities, monitor disease risk, and support occupation forces throughout Germany. The summer of 1945 reveals a different side of the Italian life. With war over, commanders devoted increasing attention to morale, recreation, and education. Athletic programs became particularly popular. Personnel participated in softball leagues, field days, and various sporting competitions organized throughout the division. Recreation rooms were established, and soldiers attended movies, stage productions, and music performances by notable entertainers, including Jack Benny, Ingrid Bergman, Larry Adler, and Martha Tilden. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to see more, click the videos on the left and the right. If you have any other video suggestions or questions, comment them below. Have a great day.